The old woman's chair was facing the wrong window. Emma Whitaker noticed it before she noticed the silver plates, before she noticed the black banners hanging from the rafters, before she noticed how many guards had been placed near the western wall for a dinner that was supposed to celebrate peace. Lady Margaret Blackwood's chair should have faced the hearth. Everyone who had served in Graymoor Hall for longer than a week knew that. The old Luna was 72, and the winter draft from the western windows made her bones ache so sharply that she sometimes hid her pain by closing her hand around the armrest until her knuckles whitened. The chair nearest the fire was always angled slightly toward the flames, close enough for warmth, far enough that smoke would not trouble her breathing. But tonight, the chair had been turned. Not much, just enough. Its high back now faced the great hearth while its open side pointed toward the tall western window, where heavy velvet curtains hung too still over the dark shape of the balcony beyond. To a noble, it was nothing. To a waitress, it was wrong. Emma stood with a tray of wine cups balanced against her hip and felt the first cold thread of unease slip beneath her ribs. She was 24, pale-skinned, soft-faced, with warm brown hair pinned beneath a plain servant's ribbon and a cream linen dress hidden beneath a white apron. Men sometimes called her pretty when they had taken enough wine to forget servants could hear. Pretty in the harmless way. Pretty like a candle on a table. Useful for light, easy to replace. Emma had learned to let them think that. A waitress who survived in Graymoor Hall learned quickly that attention was not kindness. Attention was a hand closing around the wrist, a blame placed where power could not be challenged, a laugh from someone whose boots cost more than her winter wages. So she moved carefully, quietly, carrying wine, clearing plates, apologizing before accusation could find a shape. But she noticed things. She noticed when Lord Halden drank with his left hand only after lying. She noticed when the steward hid shaking fingers inside his sleeves. She noticed when old women pretended not to hurt because pride was sometimes the last cloak rank allowed them to keep. And she noticed Lady Margaret's chair. Emma crossed the hall as if refilling cups near the high table. She paused beside the old woman's place and set down a glass of warm spiced water instead of wine. No one had asked for it. No one would thank her for it. But Lady Margaret's cough worsened after red wine, and Emma had seen the old Luna press a hand to her chest at the last feast, while 3 councilmen continued talking over her. The cup touched the table softly. Emma's gaze lifted only far enough to check the western curtain. The rope tying it back was new. Too pale. Too clean. Pulled low around the stone hook as if someone had needed to open a narrow line between velvet and shadow. Her fingers tightened around the tray. Behind that curtain, something clicked. Small. Metallic. Almost swallowed by the sound of noble laughter. Emma went still. Then Lady Margaret entered the hall, leaning on a silver-handled cane, white hair pinned beneath a gray veil, her face composed with the tired dignity of a woman who had once ruled beside kings and now had to be helped over uneven stone. The nobles bowed. Most of them did not look at her long enough to see fear. Emma did. Lady Margaret's eyes moved once toward the western window, then to the chair, then, unexpectedly, to Emma. For one breath, the old woman and the waitress understood the same thing. The chair had not been turned for comfort. It had been turned for aim. Lady Margaret did not sit immediately. That was the second wrong thing. At every feast Emma had served in Graymoor Hall, the old Luna was guided to her chair before the first formal announcement. She accepted help with a quiet dignity that made assistance look like ceremony rather than weakness. One hand on her cane, one hand briefly on the chair arm, a controlled lowering of the body, careful enough not to show pain to men who collected weakness like gossip. But tonight, she stopped beside the turned chair and looked at it, only for a heartbeat, only long enough for Emma to see the hesitation pass across her face before pride covered it again. The steward did not notice. He was too busy ordering servants into cleaner lines. The nobles did not notice because old women became furniture to them once power moved into younger hands. The guards did not notice because their eyes were fixed on the main doors, waiting for the Alpha King. Emma noticed. She stepped closer with the tray still balanced at her hip. "My lady," she said softly, "your water." Lady Margaret looked down at the cup Emma had placed near her hand. Warm spiced water, not wine. Something in the old woman's face shifted. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. "You notice pain before pride, child," she murmured. Emma lowered her eyes quickly because praise from royal blood was dangerous when heard by the wrong person. "I only serve what is needed, my lady." Lady Margaret's mouth curved faintly. "That is rarer than serving what is asked." Before Emma could answer, the hall changed. Not loudly. Powerful rooms rarely announced danger honestly. They adjusted around it. The guards by the main doors straightened. Conversations thinned into polite fragments. A nobleman who had been laughing too freely remembered the shape of his rank and closed his mouth. The musicians near the hearth softened their strings until the melody became less music than waiting. Alpha King Damien Blackwood had arrived. The great doors opened beneath the carved wolf arch, and the winter air entered first, cold enough to stir the candles along the high table. Then Damien stepped into Graymoor Hall. He was taller than every man around him, broad through the shoulders beneath black leather armor and a dark wolf fur cloak. His face was hard in the way mountains were hard, handsome without softness, built of a strong jaw, dark hair, and pale eyes that moved across the room with controlled intelligence. He did not need a crown to look like a king. The hall recognized him before the steward spoke his name. Emma lowered her gaze. But she saw enough. She saw nobles bend, guards stiffen, betas take half a step back without being told. She saw the room make space for him the way water parts around stone. Then Damien saw his mother. For 1 second, the coldness in his face fractured. It was not a smile, not softness that others would dare mention. Only the smallest change near his eyes, a private loosening of the iron he wore for everyone else. Emma saw it and understood the danger more clearly. If someone wanted to wound the Alpha King past armor, past pride, past every guard in Graymoor, they would not aim first at his heart. They would aim at hers. Lady Margaret reached for the turned chair. Emma's fingers tightened around the tray. From behind the western curtain came another quiet click. The second click was softer than the first. That made it worse. A careless sound could be dismissed. A dropped spoon, a shifting chain, a servant bumping a tray against the edge of a table. Graymoor Hall was full of small noises wearing innocent faces. But this sound had restraint in it. Metal touching metal with deliberate care. The kind of sound made by someone trying very hard not to be heard. Emma had spent 6 years serving in rooms where powerful people believed silence belonged to them. She knew the difference between quiet and hidden. Lady Margaret's hand paused on the back of her chair. Only Emma saw the pause. The old Luna did not turn toward the curtain. She was too wise for that. Turning would tell the hunter that the prey had heard the branch break. Instead, she lowered herself slowly, allowing the steward to believe his arrangements remained untouched, allowing the nobles to continue pretending the evening was only about peace and wine and polished speeches. Emma moved closer with the tray. Not too close. A waitress who hovered near royal blood drew attention, and attention could become a blade in another man's hand. She refilled a goblet for a councilman who had not asked, adjusted a napkin already straight, lifted an empty plate from a table that did not need clearing. Each motion gave her another angle on the western wall. The curtain was wrong. The new rope did not simply hold the velvet back. It pulled the fabric low, creating a narrow dark slit between the window frame and the balcony stone. A person could kneel there. A weapon could rest there. The line pointed directly toward Lady Margaret's throat when she sat upright. Emma's breath thinned. She looked away before fear could make her stare. Near the tea cart, a servant she did not know stood with a folded towel draped over one arm. His clothes were correct. Brown vest, plain shirt, servant's belt, polished shoes. Too correct. A real servant on feast night carried small signs of labor. Wax near the cuff, flour at the wrist, a burn mark, a thread pulled loose by hurried work. This man looked prepared, not used. And he was watching Lady Margaret. Not the room. Not the king. The old woman. Damien had reached his mother's side now. He bent slightly, not enough to diminish himself before the court, just enough for her to touch his arm without lifting her shoulder too high. The gesture lasted 1 breath. Maybe 2. Private tenderness disguised as royal courtesy. The false servant's eyes narrowed. Emma felt the shape of the trap close. She turned toward the nearest pillar, pretending to avoid a pair of laughing nobles, and saw the third wrong thing. A small crossbow was hidden beneath the banquet flowers. Not fully visible. Not to anyone who had never crawled under tables to scrub spilled wine from carved legs. But Emma saw the polished curve beneath black roses, the faint gleam of a silver bolt resting in shadow. Its aim was not at Damien. It was angled toward Lady Margaret's side. Her hand tightened around the tray until the rim pressed into her palm. Then came a third click. From the balcony. A fourth from behind the tea cart. A fifth from somewhere near the stone column. No, not one assassin. Several. Not one shot. Annette. Emma looked at Lady Margaret, seated now in the wrong chair, her gray-veiled head turned toward the king she had raised, unaware or unwilling to show that she knew how close death had arranged itself around her. Damien straightened beside her. A noble lifted a glass and called for the old Luna to rise for the first toast. Emma saw Lady Margaret's fingers tighten around her cane. She saw the false servant shift his weight. She saw the curtain breathe. And she understood with a coldness so complete it felt like calm. When the king's mother stood, for silver bolts would fly. Emma had never hated a toast before. Toasts were usually harmless things. Annoying, sometimes. Long, often. A chance for old men to hear their own voices rise beneath chandeliers while servants stood with aching feet and wine pitchers heavy in both hands. But harmless. This one was a blade dressed as ceremony. The noble at the center table lifted his glass higher. To Lady Margaret Blackwood, he called, smiling too broadly. Mother of our king, keeper of old wisdom, and honored witness to tonight's peace. Applause began at the edges of the hall. Thin at first, then fuller, because people always clapped when rank told them the moment required it. Lady Margaret's hand tightened on her cane. Emma moved. She did not run. Running would have drawn the eyes of every hidden weapon before she reached the old woman. She crossed behind two servants with the careful urgency of someone correcting a service mistake, her tray held low, her head bowed. The first crossbow was beneath the flowers. The second was behind the western curtain. The third waited near the tea cart. The fourth had to be by the stone column. She had heard the click there, faint but certain, hidden beneath the scrape of a chair. For directions. For silver bolts. No guard would stop all of them in time. Emma stepped behind Lady Margaret's chair and set her tray down on the high table, close enough that the old Luna could hear the soft touch of metal against wood. "My lady," Emma whispered, "please do not stand." Lady Margaret did not turn. Her face remained composed for the hall. Only her eyes moved, sliding toward Emma from beneath the gray veil. "You hear them too," the old woman said. The words were almost nothing. A breath. A thread. Emma's throat tightened. "Yes." Lady Margaret's gaze flicked toward Damien, who stood 3 steps away speaking with the steward. "Then tell my son. I cannot reach him before they fire." For one heartbeat, the old woman's hand trembled on the cane. Not from age. From decision. Then Beta Victor Hale appeared at Emma's side. He had been across the hall moments ago. Emma was sure of it. Yet there he stood now, dark-haired, smooth-faced, dressed in deep green leather with a silver clasp at his throat, smiling down at her, as if she were a spilled cup he had graciously chosen not to punish yet. "Is there a problem with the service?" he asked. His voice was pleasant. His eyes were not. Emma lowered her head. "No, my lord." "Then step away from Lady Margaret." She kept her hand on the tray. "Her chair is too near the draught." A nearby noble chuckled. Someone murmured something about fussy servants. Victor's smile widened. A waitress does not rearrange royal seating. Emma felt Lady Margaret shift behind her, preparing to rise because ceremony demanded it, because pride demanded it, because a woman who had once ruled beside an alpha king would not let a room see her hesitate. Emma turned slightly, blocking the chair with her own body. Only slightly. Enough. Victor's hand closed around her wrist. Not hard enough to make her cry out. Hard enough to warn her that he could make pain private. "Move," he said softly. Emma looked down at his hand. On his thumb was a signet ring stamped with the Graymoor Armory crest. Her breath caught. Armory silver. Not stolen bolts. Issued bolts. Victor saw her see it. For the first time, the smile left his face. Across the hall, the noble raised his glass again. "Lady Margaret, will you honor us?" The room turned toward the old woman. Damien turned too. Lady Margaret began to stand. Emma heard 4 mechanisms tighten at once. Click, 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 click. Victor's fingers crushed her wrist. "Do not," he whispered. Emma lifted her eyes to Lady Margaret. The old woman's gaze was steady now, sad and brave, and too tired to be surprised by betrayal. Emma understood then that no one was coming in time, so she stopped trying to be allowed. She tore her wrist from Victor's grip, seized the tray from the table, and stepped directly in front of the Alpha King's mother as the first silver bolt left the dark. The first silver bolt struck the tray. The sound was not like the stories. It was not clean, not heroic, not a bright ring of metal meeting metal beneath banners and candlelight. It was a brutal, buckling crack that drove the tray back against Emma's arms and sent pain bursting through both wrists at once. The force nearly knocked her down. She held. Lady Margaret gasped behind her. Someone screamed Emma's name, though later she would not remember who. The second bolt came from the western curtain. Emma did not see it leave the dark. She felt the air split beside her cheek, heard the soft, vicious hiss of silver passing too close, and twisted her body before thought could catch up. The bolt tore through the loose fabric of her sleeve and buried itself in the high back of Lady Margaret's chair, exactly where the old woman's chest had been a heartbeat earlier. The room had not yet understood. That was the terrible part. The court was still inside the space between event and meaning. Nobles stared with mouths open, glasses raised, applause dying slowly in their hands. Guards turned toward one sound, then another, too late to know which direction death had chosen first. Emma understood because she had been listening before the room knew it needed ears. The third bolt fired from near the tea cart. The false servant dropped his towel as the small crossbow snapped upward from beneath it. The silver point flashed toward Lady Margaret's throat. Emma lifted the tray again. The bolt struck the rim, glanced off, and sliced across Emma's upper arm instead of the old woman behind her. Heat opened through her sleeve. She did not look at it. Looking would make it real. Lady Margaret's hand caught the back of Emma's apron. "Child, down," Emma said. It was not a servant's tone. It was not polite. She shoved backward with her hip, forcing Lady Margaret into the chair as the fourth click came from the stone column. This one was closest. Too close for the tray. Too fast for a guard. Emma saw Victor Hale's face across the table, no longer smiling, no longer pretending anything except rage. His eyes were fixed not on Lady Margaret now, but on Emma, as if the waitress had personally insulted the order of the world by refusing to let his murder happen neatly. The fourth bolt flew. Emma turned her body over Lady Margaret's, making herself as wide as a person could become when there was no time left for fear. The impact struck high against her shoulder, not deep enough to end her, deep enough to steal the strength from her knees. The tray fell from her hands and hit the stone with a warped metallic sound. Wine cups shattered. Red wine spread across the floor beneath her shoes. Emma stumbled, caught herself against the arm of Lady Margaret's chair, and tasted copper at the back of her throat though she had not bitten her tongue. Silence slammed into Graymoor Hall. Not the respectful silence that followed a king. Not the tense silence before a treaty. This was the silence of a room watching a waitress stand between four silver bolts and the 72-year-old mother of the Alpha King. Emma could hear her own breathing. Short, uneven, wrong. Lady Margaret's hands closed around her waist from behind, frail but fierce, trying to hold her upright. Then Damien Blackwood moved. The Alpha King crossed the hall so quickly the nearest guards seemed slow by comparison. One moment he stood near the steward, pale eyes fixed on the impossible scene. The next he was at his mother's chair, one hand catching Emma before her legs finally failed, the other reaching for Lady Margaret as if he needed to feel both of them alive before he could believe the world had not taken one from him. "Mother," he said. His voice was quiet. Too quiet. "I am here," Lady Margaret answered, breath shaking. Because of her. Emma tried to step back. There was nowhere to go. Damien's arm held her steady, careful despite the power in him, his gaze dropping to the torn sleeve, the ruined tray, the silver bolt lodged in the chair behind his mother's head. Behind his mother's head. The room saw it then. All at once. The angle. The chair. The bolts. The fact that Emma had not thrown herself into ceremony for attention or panic. She had blocked an execution. Victor's voice cut through the silence. "Seize the waitress." Damien lifted his head. The hall went colder. Victor pointed at Emma, his expression already reshaping itself into outrage. She knew where every bolt would come from. She moved before the guards. She is part of the attack. Emma could barely breathe, but she looked at the bolt stuck in the chair, then at Victor's ring, and even through pain, she saw the tiny armory crest burned into the silver head. She whispered, "Issued." Damien looked down at her. Emma forced the rest out. Those bolts were issued from Graymoor's armory. For 1 second, No one seemed to understand the word. Issued. It was too small for what had happened. Too plain for the broken tray on the floor, for the silver bolts buried in royal wood, for Lady Margaret's shaking hands still clutching Emma's apron, for the Alpha King standing over both of them with murderless silence gathering in his eyes. But Damien understood. Emma felt it in the way his arms steadied beneath her before his gaze even moved. He looked from her face to the bolt in the chair, then to the torn sleeve at her arm, then to the signet ring on Victor Hale's thumb. Graymoor's armory crest. Not rebel iron. Not stolen scrap. Royal issue. The kind of weapon that required a name, a seal, and permission before it ever left the vault beneath the eastern tower. Say that again, Damien said. His voice was soft. The hall went very still. Emma swallowed. Pain beat through her shoulder in slow, hot waves. Her knees wanted the floor, and only Damien's hand at her back and Lady Margaret's grip behind her kept her upright. The bolts, Emma said, each word dragging itself past the tightness in her chest. They came from your armory. Victor laughed immediately. Too quickly. A waitress recognizes royal armory work now. The nobles shifted at that. Some with doubt, some with relief. Doubt was easier than horror. If Emma could be made ridiculous, then the room would not have to admit that an assassin had reached the king's mother through trusted doors. Emma lifted one trembling hand toward the bolt in the chair. Look under the silver head. Damien's eyes did not leave Victor. Captain. The captain of the royal guard stepped forward, drew a cloth from his belt, and carefully gripped the bolt where it had split the chair. Silver made even seasoned wolves cautious. He turned it beneath the candlelight. At first, nothing showed. Then the captain's jaw tightened. There is a mark, he said. Victor's face did not change, but his hand closed over his ring. Emma saw it. So did Damien. The captain angled the bolt for the room to see. Near the base of the silver head, burned so small most eyes would have passed over it, was the Graymoor armory crest, a crowned wolf over crossed hammers. A murmur moved through the hall. Lady Margaret's voice cut through it, frail but clear. Who signed them out? No one answered. That was the third truth. Silence. Emma had learned, always pointed toward someone. Damien turned to Victor. The beta lifted his chin. Your Majesty, the armory serves the crown. Many seals pass through its ledgers. This girl could not possibly know. She knew where the bolts came from while bleeding, Lady Margaret said. You knew how to explain them before anyone accused you. Victor's mouth closed. For the first time, fear touched him. Not much. Enough. Damien looked at the captain. Seal the armory. Bring the ledger. Lock every door. The captain bowed. Yes, Your Majesty. Two guards moved at once. Victor's eyes flicked toward the western curtain. Emma followed the glance. A shape shifted behind the velvet. Not the first assassin. Another. Curtain, Emma whispered. Damien moved before the word finished. He drew the dagger from the captain's belt, not throwing it to kill, only sending it hard enough to pin the velvet aside. The hidden man behind it flinched into view, crossbow still loaded, face white beneath a servant's cap. The hall saw him. The fifth bolt was aimed directly at Lady Margaret's chair. Lady Margaret drew in one sharp breath. Every noble in Graymoor Hall finally understood. Emma had not imagined danger. She had counted it. The assassin dropped the crossbow and tried to run. The royal guard seized him before he reached the balcony stair. A strip of green leather fell from his sleeve, stamped with Victor Hale's private seal. The room turned as one toward the beta. Victor looked at the seal on the floor, then at Emma. Hatred burned through the mask. She should have died with the first bolt, he said. The confession was not loud. It did not need to be. Damien stepped in front of Emma and his mother. Not beside them now. In front. The whole hall seemed to shrink from him. Take him, the Alpha King said. And this time, no one dared hesitate. Victor Hale did not resist until the guards touched him. That was how Emma knew he had believed, until the very last breath, that the room would still choose him. Men like Victor did not think of themselves as cornered when truth appeared. They thought truth was a servant to be dismissed, a woman to be silenced, a ledger to be burned, a witness to be renamed before fear had time to harden into testimony. For one impossible moment, even after his private seal lay on the stone and his assassin knelt beneath the western curtain, Victor looked around Graymoor Hall as if waiting for rank to rescue him. No one moved. The nobles who had laughed at Emma's concern for a chair now stared at their goblets, their sleeves, The floor, anything but the waitress still standing in front of Lady Margaret with a torn sleeve and a body held upright by will alone. Then the captain gripped Victor's arm. Victor struck him. Not well. Not with the clean motion of a trained warrior. It was the ugly movement of a man whose mask had broken before his plan did. The blow caught the captain across the jaw and sent him half a step back. 2 guards drew swords. A noblewoman screamed. The hidden assassin near the curtain tried to rise and was forced down again. Damien did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Victor. One word crossed the hall. Victor froze. The Alpha King stood between his mother and the Beta, one hand still supporting Emma at her back. His face had gone colder than stone. Not wild. Not furious in the way men become when they want the room to admire their anger. This was worse. This was a king placing every future consequence in order before delivering the first one. Victor swallowed. Then he pointed at Emma. She led you into this, he said. Think, Damien. She knew the bolts, the angles, the chair. She moved before the guards because she had been told where to move. The accusation found the room quickly. Lies always did when they were given a servant-shaped target. Emma felt suspicion turn toward her like a draft under a door. She wanted to speak. She wanted to say that she had heard the clicks, seen the chair, recognized the crest. But the pain in her shoulder had become a white ring around her thoughts, tightening with every breath. Lady Margaret spoke for her. Enough. The old woman's voice was not loud, but it carried with the authority of someone who had once ruled beside a king and had never forgotten how command fit inside the mouth. Victor turned toward her. My lady, you are shaken. I am 72, Lady Margaret said. Not foolish. Silence fell so sharply Emma almost felt it touch the floor. Lady Margaret pushed herself straighter in the chair, one trembling hand still gripping Emma's apron, as if refusing to let the girl who saved her collapse unnoticed. This waitress set warm water by my hand, because she remembered wine worsens my cough, she said. She noticed my chair had been turned because she remembered where pain sits in old bones. She heard your weapons because she was listening while the rest of you performed respect. Her eyes moved over the hall. Do not insult me by calling her wisdom treason. Emma's throat tightened. Damien looked down at his mother, and something in his face shifted for half a second. Gratitude, fear, love, all locked behind the discipline of a man who could not afford to break in front of enemies. Then the captain returned with the armory ledger. He held it out with both hands. Your Majesty. Victor went very still. Damien took the book. The pages were thick, bound in dark leather, marked with wax seals and neat columns of issued weapons. The captain turned to the latest entry. His finger stopped beside a line written in black ink. For silver bolts. 1 reserve bolt. Authorized under Beta Victor Hale's seal. Issued for Western Hall security. The words entered the room like a blade sliding between ribs. Emma saw it happen. The nobles understood. The guards understood. Even the servants along the walls understood. Victor had not only arranged the attack. He had done it with the arrogance of a man certain no one would question paperwork signed by rank. Damien looked at him. Victor's face emptied. The Alpha King closed the ledger. Chain him. This time, when the guards took Victor, he did not strike them. He stared at Emma instead. You should have stayed behind the tray, he said. Emma's hand, still shaking, closed around the bent edge of the silver tray on the floor. No, she whispered. Damien heard her. So did Lady Margaret. Emma lifted her head enough to meet Victor's eyes. I was standing exactly where I needed to be. For the first time since the bolts flew, the servants along the wall looked up. And Victor Hale, Beta of Graymoor, was dragged away while the waitress he meant to bury remained beside the Alpha King's mother, bleeding, trembling, and seen. The healer arrived too late to save Emma from pain, but not too late to keep the pain from taking her. That was how she understood the room after Victor was dragged away. Everything came late in Graymoor Hall. Guards. Truth. Apologies. Help. The only thing that had moved in time was a waitress no one had thought worth watching. The healer knelt before her with a leather case in one hand and a pale expression he tried to hide behind professionalism. He was older, gray at the temples, with the steady hands of someone who had seen enough wounds to know which ones allowed fear and which ones demanded work. Do not move, he said. Emma almost laughed. She had been told not to move all her life, but never so gently. Damien helped lower her onto the chair beside his mother. careful not to jostle the bolt lodged near her shoulder. Lady Margaret kept one hand wrapped around Emma's wrist, her thumb pressed lightly against the pulse there, as if she needed proof the girl remained alive. The hall watched. Emma hated that. Being seen while serving was dangerous. Being seen while hurt felt worse. Her body had become evidence before she had agreed to show it. Torn sleeve, bent tray, bruised wrist. A wound meant to prove she had stood where death arrived. The healer cut the fabric around her shoulder. Damien's jaw tightened. Emma noticed because she noticed everything now. The way his hand flexed once at his side. The way his eyes moved from the silver bolt to his mother's face. Then back to Emma, as if each glance added another stone to the wall he was building around his anger. The healer studied the wound. It missed anything fatal. Lady Margaret closed her eyes. Only for a moment. Damien breathed once, slowly. The healer looked at Emma. You were lucky. Emma's mouth felt dry. No, the healer paused. Emma looked at the bent tray lying on the stone, the silver bolt still caught in its warped center, the armory crest burned tiny beneath the head. I was listening. Lady Margaret's hand tightened around hers. The captain returned from the armory with 2 guards behind him and a narrow wooden box sealed in gray wax. He set it on the high table before Damien. Your Majesty, he said. The armory master confirms the bolts were released under Victor Hale's authority. But there is more. Damien opened the box. Inside lay old inventory slips, seal impressions, and a small ledger wrapped in oilcloth. The captain lifted the ledger carefully. This was hidden behind a loose stone in the armory office. The first entries are from 12 years ago. Emma felt the hall tilt before a word was read. 12 years. Her mother had been alive then. The captain read the first name. Rose Whitaker. Emma stopped breathing. Lady Margaret turned toward her sharply. Your mother? Emma nodded once. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. She was a nurse in the royal wing. The old Luna's face changed. Not with confusion. With memory. Rose, she whispered. She brought mint broth when my fever would not break. She said the armory smelled of silver when no weapons had been ordered. The captain looked down at the ledger. She recorded missing silver shipments. Small amounts. Hidden inside medical supply requests. All signed through Victor's office. Emma stared at the pages. Her mother's handwriting was there. Slanted. Careful. Familiar enough to hurt. She told me marks mattered, Emma said. On bottles. On blades. On bolts. She said powerful men trust servants not to read labels. The hall was silent now. Not because Damien commanded it. Because Emma's mother had begun speaking from a ledger no one had thought to hear. The captain turned another page. Rose Whitaker was dismissed 3 days after this final note. Lady Margaret's eyes filled with a grief too old to be sudden and too sudden to be controlled. I was told she stole medicine, the old woman said. Emma looked at the floor. She died believing no one believed her. Damien closed the ledger with terrible care. I believe her now, he said. The words entered Emma slowly. Too late for her mother. Too late for many things. But not empty. Lady Margaret lifted Emma's hand to her cheek, heedless of the watching court. Your mother saved me once, she whispered. And tonight, her daughter did the same. Emma's eyes burned. Across the hall, servants stood straighter. Damien turned to the court, the armory ledger in his hand, and Emma's blood still dark on his sleeve. Victor Hale did not begin betraying this house tonight, he said. He began when he learned the people he ignored were the ones keeping record. Then he looked back at Emma. Not at the wound. At her. And for the first time, Graymoor Hall understood that the waitress had not only taken 4 bolts for the Alpha King's mother. She had carried 12 years of buried truth into the light. Damien Blackwood did not make his vow while standing above Emma. That was the first thing Graymoor Hall remembered. Not the broken tray. Not the silver bolts laid on the table like dead insects. Not Victor Hale being dragged back in chains with his private seal exposed and his old crimes unfolding from ledgers, slips, and the handwriting of women he had trusted the world to forget. They remembered the Alpha King lowering himself to one knee before a waitress. The movement was so quiet that, for a moment, the room did not understand what it had seen. Kings knelt to no one in halls built to remind everyone of their height. Alphas bowed their heads only to gods, graves, and mothers. But Damien Blackwood, ruler of Graymoor, commander of the Northern Packs, the man whose silence could make seasoned warriors reconsider their breathing, lowered one knee to the black stone beside the chair where Emma Whitaker sat wrapped in bandages, torn linen, and pain. A sound passed through the court. Not a gasp. Something smaller. Something frightened. Emma stared at him, unable to move. The healer had finished binding her shoulder and arm. The fourth bolt had missed deep damage by less than an inch, he had said, though his face suggested he did not enjoy measuring miracles so closely. Her wrists ached from the force of the tray. Her ribs burned where she had twisted over Lady Margaret. Every breath reminded her that courage did not end when the danger passed. Sometimes courage was simply remaining upright while everyone finally decided to look. Damien removed the black wolf fur cloak from his shoulders. Without it, he looked no less royal, only more dangerous. He placed the cloak around Emma carefully, over the healer's clean linen, over her stained apron, over the evidence of what she had chosen before anyone gave her permission to matter. This court laughed when she moved a chair, Damien said. His voice did not rise. It reached every corner anyway. This court watched when Victor Hale put his hand on her wrist. This court hesitated when bolts flew toward my mother. And this waitress did what nobles, guards, and councilmen failed to do. No one answered. Lady Margaret sat beside Emma, one thin hand still holding hers. The old Luna's face was pale, but her eyes were clear and fierce beneath the gray veil. She stood between death and me, Lady Margaret said. And she did it before anyone in this hall finished understanding there was death to fear. Damien looked at his mother then. Something passed between them that did not belong to the court. Terror after the fact. Love restrained too long. Gratitude so deep it had not yet found a safe shape. Then he looked back at Emma. Emma Whitaker, he said. Her name and his voice made the room feel different. He did not say waitress as if it were small. He did not say servant as if it were an apology. He said her name like the beginning of law. You saved my mother, he said. You honored your own. You saw the betrayal hidden in this house, while those with rank mistook blindness for dignity. Victor laughed from where the guards held him. It was a broken sound, sharpened by desperation. You cannot make a wife out of a girl with a serving tray because she was useful once. Damien did not look away from Emma. That is not why I am asking. The hall froze. Asking, not taking, not claiming. Asking. Emma's throat tightened so suddenly the pain in her shoulder seemed to move aside for something larger and more terrifying. Damien reached for her uninjured hand, but stopped before touching it. He waited. That nearly undid her. No one in Graymoor had waited for Emma's permission. They had ordered, grabbed, blamed, dismissed, corrected. Even kindness had usually arrived as something decided for her by someone standing higher. This man, this king, knelt in front of an entire court and waited for her choice. Emma placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers with impossible care. If you accept, Damien said, I will make you my wife before this hall, not because you served me, not because you bled for my house, and not because I owe you a debt too large for gold. His eyes held hers. But because a kingdom is only as strong as the person brave enough to see what everyone else ignores. And I would rather build my future beside the woman who saved what I could not bear to lose than beside anyone this court calls suitable. The silence was complete. Emma looked at Lady Margaret. The old woman's thumb brushed once over her hand. If my son has any wisdom, Lady Margaret said softly, he will never let you stand behind him again. Emma almost smiled. Almost. Tears blurred the hall, the banners, the stunned nobles, the servants standing along the walls with their eyes lifted and their mouths slightly open. She thought of her mother, Rose, writing down stolen silver in a ledger no one believed. She thought of every night spent carrying trays past men who never learned her name. She thought of the chair turned toward the wrong window, and the 4 clicks that had changed her life. Then she looked back at Damien. I will not be taken from one kind of service and placed into another, she said. A few nobles inhaled sharply. Damien's expression did not change except for the smallest flicker of approval. No, he said. You will not. If I stand beside you, I speak. You speak. If your court lies, I say so. You say so. If your guards ignore servants again, I will make them regret it. For the first time that night, something like a smile touched his mouth. Good. Emma closed her fingers around his. Then yes. The servants along the walls did not cheer immediately. They seemed too stunned for sound. Then Martha from the kitchens began to cry. A stable boy bowed. A laundress covered her mouth with both hands. One by one, the invisible people of Graymoor lowered their heads, not to the king, but to the waitress wrapped in his cloak. Damien rose, still holding Emma's hand, and turned to the hall. "Witness her," he said. "Emma Whitaker, daughter of Rose Whitaker, savior of Lady Margaret Blackwood, and from this moment, the woman I choose as my wife and equal before Graymoor." Victor's face went gray. The nobles bent their knees. Lady Margaret smiled through tears. And Emma, who had taken 4 silver bolts for the Alpha King's 72-year-old mother, did not lower her eyes. By dawn, Graymoor Hall had become 2 different rooms. One was the room the nobles wanted remembered, a room of ceremony interrupted by violence, of unfortunate betrayal discovered and contained, of a king making a dramatic vow beside his wounded rescuer while the court, naturally, bowed in solemn approval. That was the version already forming behind careful eyes and tightened mouths. Emma could feel it being polished before the blood had dried. Powerful people did that with shame. They trimmed it, named it, softened the edges until guilt could be held without cutting anyone important. The other room was the real one. The room where a 72-year-old woman had nearly died because her chair had been turned toward a window. The room where 4 silver bolts had flown before most guards drew breath. The room where servants had seen everything and been believed only after a waitress bled enough to become impossible to ignore. Emma sat in a smaller chamber off the east corridor while the healer changed her bandages. Damien's cloak remained around her shoulders, though it had been folded back carefully so the healer could work. Someone had brought a clean gown of pale blue wool, but Emma had not changed into it yet. Her cream linen dress was torn, stained, and ruined beyond saving. Still, it was the dress she had worn when she stopped the bolts. Taking it off felt too much like letting the court put the night away. The healer tightened the final wrap around her shoulder. Emma hissed through her teeth. "Forgive me," he said immediately. She looked at him, startled. Servants apologized to healers. Healers did not apologize to waitresses. Then she remembered. Not a waitress now. Not only that. The thought felt too large and too fragile to touch. Lady Margaret sat near the hearth with a blanket over her knees, watching the healer's hands with the stern attention of a woman who had survived court by trusting very few people completely. She had refused to be taken to bed. She had refused broth twice. She had refused every suggestion that she was too shaken to remain present. "My son gets that from me," she had said when Damien tried to argue. Damien had not argued again. Now he stood by the window, speaking quietly with the captain of the guard. Victor Hale's ledger lay open on the table between them. Names filled the pages. Armory requests. False medical orders. Silver shipments hidden inside household inventories. Years of theft disguised as service to the crown. Rose Whitaker's notes had exposed the beginning. Emma's body had exposed the rest. The captain closed the ledger. "There are more people involved." Damien's face did not change. "How many?" "Enough that arresting them openly may start panic before we know who controls the lower gates." Emma listened without meaning to. Old habits did not vanish because a king had knelt. Servants heard things from corners. Waitresses learned the shape of danger by pretending not to listen. Lady Margaret looked at her. "You heard something." Emma glanced at Damien. He was already watching her. Not suspiciously. Expectantly. That was worse, in a way. Suspicion she knew how to survive. Trust asked something from her she had not practiced giving. Emma pointed to the ledger. "Victor used medical supply orders because no one questions medicine during winter fever." The captain nodded. "Yes." "Then check the herb cellar before the gates." The room went still. Emma swallowed. If they moved silver through medical stores, they needed someone below stairs to carry crates without making guards curious. The herb cellar has a back passage to the stables. Old one. Most nobles forget it exists. Damien turned fully from the window. Lady Margaret smiled faintly. The captain looked embarrassed that he had not thought of it. "Good," Emma thought tiredly. "Let them learn." Damien stepped toward her, stopping beside the healer's chair. "Can you draw the passage?" Emma looked down at her bandaged hand, then at the ruined dress beneath the cloak, then at Lady Margaret alive beside the fire. "Yes," she said. The word hurt less than breathing. A servant brought parchment. Another brought ink. Both looked at Emma with wide eyes, as if waiting for her to become someone unrecognizable. She did not. She took the pen awkwardly in her uninjured hand and began to draw the parts of Graymoor no councilman had ever bothered to remember. The herb cellar, the back passage, the servant stair, the narrow door behind the old wine racks. Damien watched each line appear. "You know my castle better than my guards," he said. Emma did not look up. "No," she said. "Your guards know the places they are told to protect." She marked the cellar door with a small cross. "I know the places everyone expects to stay invisible." Outside, Boots began moving through the corridor, not toward the grand hall, downward, toward the hidden passages. And for the first time in Graymoor's history, the kingdom was being defended by a waitress's map. The herb cellar smelled like mint, damp stone, and betrayal. Emma had not been allowed to go with the first guards. Damien had said it once, quietly, and for a moment she had seen the king beneath the man who had knelt before her. Not command for command's sake. Fear shaped into restraint. She was pale, bandaged, and still fighting pain with every breath. A second wound would not make her braver. It would only make him foolish for allowing it. So Emma stayed in the east chamber with Lady Margaret while the captain took her map below. Waiting was worse than being hurt. Pain gave the body something to do. Waiting gave the mind too much room. She sat near the hearth with Damien's cloak around her shoulders and watched the door as footsteps moved beneath the floor. Not clearly. Graymoor's stones were thick and old. But Emma knew the castle's underbody. She knew where sounds traveled, which corridors carried Boots upward through walls, which passages swallowed voices completely. The first heavy step meant guards on the servant stair. The second echo, softer and delayed, meant someone had opened the wine rack door. Then nothing. Lady Margaret's hand rested over the blanket on her lap. Her fingers were still, but Emma saw the effort inside that stillness. The old Luna had spent a lifetime making fear look like dignity. Emma recognized the shape because servants did the same thing with obedience. "You are listening to the floor," Lady Margaret said. Emma looked up. "Yes, my lady." "Good. Floors are more honest than courtiers." Despite herself, Emma almost smiled. Almost. A shout rose beneath them. Not loud enough to make out words. Loud enough to stop the room's breathing. Damien moved first. He had been standing by the table with Victor's ledger open before him, but at the sound, his entire body changed. Not rushed. Not panicked. Arranged. The way a blade becomes useful when lifted. Emma gripped the arm of her chair. Another shout. Then the crash of wood against stone. The door opened before Damien reached it, and a young guard stumbled inside, face flushed from running. "Your Majesty," he said. The herb cellar passage was occupied. 3 men. 2 surrendered. 1 tried to burn the records. Damien's eyes sharpened. "Did he?" "No, Your Majesty." The captain stopped him. Emma closed her eyes for 1 heartbeat. The guard continued. They found crates marked as fever supplies. Silver filings hidden beneath dried lavender. Crossbow mechanisms. Armory wax. And letters with Victor Hale's seal. Lady Margaret exhaled slowly. Damien turned toward Emma. "He did not say you were right. He did not need to. The room had heard it." The guard looked at her too, awkwardly, with the expression of a man who had been trained to obey maps from captains and had just followed one drawn by a wounded waitress. "There is more," he said. Damien's gaze returned to him. "Speak." "One of the men claims there are loyal servants marked for punishment. People who saw shipments. People who questioned orders. Their names are listed." Emma stood too quickly. Pain cut wide across her shoulder. Damien caught her before the room tilted fully, one hand steady at her uninjured arm. He did not force her back into the chair. He waited until her feet remembered the floor. "Names," Emma said. The guard swallowed. "Yes, my lady. My lady." The words passed through her strangely, too formal and too new, but she had no room for them yet. "Bring the list here," she said. The guard looked to Damien. Damien looked at the guard, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "She gave you an order." The guard bowed at once. "Yes, my lady." When he left, Lady Margaret's eyes shone with something fierce and tired. Emma touched the edge of the cloak at her shoulders, feeling suddenly the weight of all the people below stairs who had seen too much and learned to survive by forgetting. Victor had not only aimed bolts at a mother, he had aimed fear at an entire castle. Damien stood beside her, close enough to steady her, not close enough to own the moment. "What will you do with the names?" he asked. Emma looked toward the door, toward the hidden passages, toward the world beneath polished stone where servants carried secrets because no one thought their hands were worth watching. "I will read them," she said. Out loud. Lady Margaret smiled then. Small. Proud. And beneath Graymoor Hall, while guards dragged silver from the dark, the kingdom's next truth began climbing the stairs. The list arrived folded in half and stained with lavender dust. That was the first thing Emma noticed. Not the guard who carried it with both hands, as if it were heavier than parchment. Not the captain behind him with silver filings on his sleeve and anger held carefully behind his eyes. Not Damien, who had gone very still beside the hearth when the paper entered the room. Lavender dust. Victor Hale had hidden fear beneath the scent of healing. Emma took the list with her uninjured hand. The paper trembled once between her fingers. She hated that. She hated that her body could still betray weakness when her mind had already chosen what must be done. But pain had its own language, and hers was speaking loudly now. Her shoulder burned beneath the bandage. Her wrists throbbed. Each breath pulled at places the bolts had bruised or torn. Damien saw the tremor. He did not take the paper from her. That mattered. Lady Margaret shifted forward in her chair. "Read it here first, child." Emma looked at the names. There were 23. Kitchen hands. Stable boys. 2 laundresses. A wine porter. A candle maid named Elise who had disappeared 3 weeks ago after asking why the armory master ordered fever crates at midnight. Emma knew some of them. Others she recognized only by work, by the passing shape of a face in corridor light, by hands carrying things no noble remembered receiving. Beside each name was a mark. Questioned shipment. Saw seal. Heard mechanism. Refused order. To be removed after feast. The last phrase turned the room colder than winter. To be removed. Not dismissed. Not reassigned. Removed. Lady Margaret closed her eyes. The captain swore under his breath. Damien did not move. "How many are still inside Graymoor?" The captain looked at the guard. The guard swallowed. 17 accounted for, Your Majesty. 3 missing. 3 locked in the lower storage rooms. Alive. Emma's grip tightened on the paper. "Bring them up." The guard looked to Damien, this time only for a heartbeat, then corrected himself. "Yes, my lady." When he left, Emma felt the title follow him out like a thing too large for the corridor. My lady. She was not ready for it. But perhaps readiness had never been the point. She had not been ready for 4 bolts either. Or Victor's accusation. Or Damien kneeling. Or her mother's handwriting rising from an old ledger to accuse the deadliest man in the room. The servants were brought to Graymoor Hall before noon. Not through the lower doors. Through the main doors. Damien ordered it that way. Emma understood why when she saw the nobles gathered again beneath the black banners. They had returned washed, dressed, and arranged for dignity, as if clean collars could separate them from the night before. Their eyes moved to Emma first, then to the cloak around her shoulders, then to the bandage visible beneath it. Some looked ashamed. Some looked annoyed that shame had become public. Good, Emma thought. Let it be public. The 3 servants from the storage rooms came in leaning against guards. One had a bruised cheek. One had rope burns at his wrists. The third was Martha from the kitchens, the same girl who cried when Damien named Emma his chosen wife. Her face was pale, but when she saw Emma, her spine straightened. Emma stood from the chair beside Lady Margaret. Pain flared. Damien stepped closer. She gave him one glance. He stopped, not because he did not want to help her, because he understood that this standing had to belong to her. Emma unfolded the list. The hall quieted slowly, reluctantly, like a guilty animal lowering its head. "These names were found beneath the herb cellar," she said. Her voice was not strong, but it carried. Victor Hale marked these people for punishment because they saw what others ignored. They asked why silver was moved under medicine labels. They questioned orders. They noticed seals. They heard mechanisms being built beneath a hall where nobles were drinking wine. She looked up. No one met her eyes for long. My mother wrote records no one believed. Lady Margaret was almost killed because no one questioned a chair. I took 4 bolts because servants had been trained to notice danger and nobles had been trained to dismiss the people noticing it. A councilman shifted. Lady Emma, surely no one intended. Do not soften it, Emma said. The words surprised even her. The councilman went still. Damien's mouth did not move, but something in his eyes sharpened with approval. Emma read every name aloud. Slowly, not as evidence. As people. Martha Reed, kitchen assistant. Samuel Pike, stable hand. Elise Warren, candlemaid. Thomas Bell, wine porter. Each name entered the hall and refused to leave. By the time she finished, several servants were crying quietly along the walls. The nobles looked smaller than they had when the feast began. Lady Margaret sat with one hand over her heart, eyes bright and unashamed. Damien stepped beside Emma at last. "These people are under crown protection," he said. "Their wages will be doubled. Their testimony will be recorded. Anyone who threatens them answers to me." Then he looked at Emma, and to her. The hall understood the second command more slowly. That made it stronger. Emma looked down at the list, at the lavender dust still clinging to the fold, and realized that Victor had made one mistake greater than all the others. He had written down the names of the people he meant to erase. Now Graymoor had heard them, and no one could pretend they had been invisible again. By sunset, the chair was moved back toward the hearth. Emma noticed that first, not the chains around Victor Hale's wrists, not the nobles gathered in the courtyard beneath a bruised winter sky, not the guards standing at every gate with uncovered blades and new orders written in Damien's own hand. Not even the black wolf cloak still resting over her shoulders, heavier now with meaning than warmth. The chair. Lady Margaret's chair had been returned to its proper place beside the fire, angled toward comfort, away from the western window. It should have been a small thing. Furniture corrected after a night of blood and betrayal. But Emma stood in the doorway of Graymoor Hall and felt her throat tighten at the sight of it. Sometimes justice began with the world admitting what had been wrong. Damien stood beside her. He did not ask if she could walk farther. He had already learned that asking was better than assuming, and waiting was better than taking. His hand hovered near her back, close enough to steady her if pain stole her balance, far enough to let the court see she stood by choice. Lady Margaret sat in the restored chair, wrapped in gray wool, alive. 72 years old. Still proud. Still watching everything. Victor was brought before the hall in chains. He looked smaller without permission surrounding him. Not weaker exactly. Men like Victor did not lose cruelty when they lost power. They only lost the room's cooperation. His eyes passed over the nobles, over the guards, over the servants now standing openly along the walls. Then they found Emma. "You think this changes what you are?" he said. His voice scraped through the hall. "A waitress in a king's cloak is still a waitress." Emma felt the old instinct rise. "Lower your eyes. Stay quiet. Survive." Then Lady Margaret's hand closed around her cane, and Damien's hand settled lightly at Emma's back. Not pushing, not claiming, only reminding her she was no longer standing alone. Emma lifted her head. "Yes," she said. "I am." The hall went silent. "I am the waitress who remembered where your target needed warmth. I am the waitress who heard your weapons before your soldiers did. I am the waitress who took 4 silver bolts meant for the Alpha King's mother." She stepped forward once. Pain answered. She kept standing. "And I am the daughter of Rose Whitaker, who saw your betrayal 12 years before any noble in this room had the courage to read a servant's handwriting." Victor's mouth twisted, but no one laughed with him. Damien opened Rose Whitaker's ledger and placed it on the high table beside the armory records. "Rose Whitaker is cleared of every false charge," he said. "Her name will be restored in Graymoor's histories. Her daughter will decide how her records are kept, how her witnesses are protected, and how this house learns to hear the people it once ignored." A murmur moved through the servants. Not fear, not disbelief. Something newer. Hope, perhaps, though hope was dangerous when named too early. Damien turned to Victor. "For attempted murder of Lady Margaret Blackwood, theft of crown silver, conspiracy against this house, and the silencing of innocent servants, you are stripped of rank, name, land, and command. You will be taken from Graymoor before nightfall and judged by the full council under guard loyal to no seal but mine." Victor's face drained. Rank had been his last shelter. Damien removed it like a hand from a throat. When the guards dragged him away, Victor did not look at the king. He looked at Emma. This time, she did not feel afraid. The doors closed behind him. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Lady Margaret rose. Slowly, painfully, Emma started toward her, but the old Luna lifted a hand to stop her. She crossed the short distance herself, cane striking stone, every step refusing pity. When she reached Emma, she placed both hands on the young woman's face. "You saved my life," Lady Margaret said. "But more than that, you brought my house back its eyes. Emma's vision blurred. Damien stood before her then, in front of the hall, in front of the servants, in front of the nobles who had mocked her silence and owed their king's mother to it. He took Emma's hand. "Witness her again," he said. "Emma Whitaker stands beside me not as decoration, not as debt, and not as a servant rewarded for obedience. She stands as my chosen wife, my equal, and the future Luna of Graymoor." This time, the servants bowed first. The nobles followed. Emma looked at the restored chair, the warm hearth, the ledger with her mother's name, and the man who had learned to wait for her answer. She had not been born noble. She had not been believed quickly. She had not been saved before she chose to save someone else. But when the western curtain moved, when the chair turned wrong, when 4 silver bolts flew toward a 72-year-old mother, Emma Whitaker had seen what no one else saw. She had done what no one else dared. And because of her, the Alpha King's mother lived, the traitor fell, and the invisible girl at the edge of the hall became the woman Graymoor could no longer afford to lose.